don't be kind. Challenging societal expectations, the book discusses how kindness, especially from women, is often expected as a norm in many societies, but Ghafari advocates for the importance of standing firm and not being passively kind when facing injustice or oppression. Empowerment through resistance, Ghafari highlights the significance of resistance and standing up for oneself and others in difficult situations. Sometimes being too kind can be seen as weakness, and the book encourages taking a strong stance when necessary. Personal sacrifices. As a young woman in a leadership role, Ghafari shares personal stories about the dangers and sacrifices she faced while serving as one of Afghanistan's first female mayors. This includes threats from the Taliban and how she had to prioritize resilience over kindness to survive. Navigating a male-dominated society, the book emphasizes the challenges women face in male-dominated environments and how being kind can sometimes undermine their authority or position. Ghafari argues for more assertiveness and strength, especially in patriarchal settings. Defying fear for change, Ghafari's journey illustrates that real change often comes from defying fear and societal norms, even when it means not adhering to traditional values of kindness or politeness, especially in the face of oppression or violence. These points reflect Zarifa Ghafari's experience and her perspective on navigating leadership and activism in a challenging environment. In Don't Be Kind, Zarifa Ghafari delves deeply into the concept of societal expectations, particularly regarding how women are often expected to behave. One of the most significant aspects she addresses is the pervasive expectation of kindness, especially from women in traditional or conservative societies. From an early age, women are taught to be gentle, patient, and accommodating. These characteristics are often seen as virtues, but Ghafari challenges this narrative by highlighting how such expectations can be used to control and limit women's potential. In her own life, Ghafari experienced firsthand the pressure to conform to these societal norms. As a young Afghan woman in a leadership position, she faced overwhelming resistance, not just because of her gender, but because she defied the roles traditionally assigned to women. She realized that many of the values of kindness, patience, and politeness, though outwardly positive, were subtly designed to keep women subservient, unable to challenge the male-dominated systems of power. The expectation of kindness often puts women in a position where they are discouraged from speaking up, protesting, or taking action against unfair treatment. Women are expected to endure hardship with a smile, to compromise rather than confront, and to prioritize harmony over justice. In many cases, this leads to an internalization of passivity, where women are made to feel that standing up for themselves is wrong, or worse, unkind. Ghafari argues that this societal expectation of kindness becomes a tool of oppression. When women are overly concerned with being kind or liked, they are less likely to push for change or to resist unjust systems. In positions of power, especially in conservative cultures like Afghanistan's, a woman being too kind can be seen as a sign of weakness. Ghafari found that she had to balance the idea of being kind with the need to be firm, assertive, and even harsh when necessary. Her experiences taught her that there are times when kindness must be set aside in order to fight for what is right, particularly when dealing with forces as dangerous as the Taliban. Furthermore, Ghafari explores how kindness is not always reciprocal. In a world rife with corruption, misogyny, and violence, those who expect kindness are often the ones least willing to offer it in return. This realization led her to the conclusion that kindness, in some contexts, can become a liability. It can leave one vulnerable to manipulation, exploitation, and even violence. As Ghafari navigated the treacherous political landscape of Afghanistan, she had to constantly redefine what kindness meant to her. It wasn't about pleasing others or avoiding conflict instead. It became about choosing when to be kind and when to stand her ground. In Don't Be Kind, Zarifa Ghafari presents a powerful narrative about the importance of resistance in achieving empowerment, especially for women navigating hostile environments. Her story reflects the broader reality that empowerment often comes not through passive acceptance, but through active resistance to oppression, injustice, and societal expectations that seek to limit an individual's potential. Ghafari's own life, fraught with threats and challenges, exemplifies how resistance can be a tool for survival, self-assertion, and ultimately societal change. Ghafari's journey as one of the first female mayors in Afghanistan was riddled with obstacles that would have been impossible to overcome had she chosen the path of least resistance. In her case, resistance was not merely an option but a necessity. Afghanistan, with its long history of patriarchal dominance, was not welcoming to a woman in power, especially one as young as Ghafari. From the moment she took office, she was met with hostility both overt and covert from men, who did not believe she belonged in a position of leadership. Resistance became her response to this rejection. Instead of shrinking in the face of such opposition, she fought back by asserting her right to lead and her vision for her community. Her resistance wasn't limited to external forces. She also had to resist the internalized expectations placed on her as a woman. Like many women from conservative societies, Ghafari had been raised with certain beliefs about how she should act, be deferential, avoid confrontation, and prioritize the well-being of others over her own ambitions. These values, deeply ingrained in her upbringing, conflicted with the reality of her political career, where being assertive, standing firm, and fighting for her place were essential. The path to empowerment, Ghafari realized, required her to resist not only the expectations of men, but also the traditional roles that women like her were taught to embody. This resistance, however, was not without sacrifice. Throughout her time in office, Ghafari faced death threats, assassination attempts, and the constant danger posed by the Taliban, who viewed her as an enemy. Despite these threats, she continued to resist. Her ability to persist in the face of such immense danger is a testament to her belief that empowerment often comes at great personal cost. For Ghafari, the cost of resistance was high, but it was a price she was willing to pay in order to pave the way for other women and to create a better future for her community. In Don't Be Kind, Zarifa Ghafari shares the deeply personal and painful sacrifices she made in her quest for empowerment and justice, revealing the tremendous cost of her journey. Ghafari's rise to prominence as one of Afghanistan's first female mayors was marked by a level of personal risk that most people would find unimaginable. Her story sheds light on how the pursuit of change, particularly in environments fraught with danger and oppression, often demands the highest form of sacrifice, where one's personal safety, well-being, and even the lives of loved ones are at stake. From the very moment she accepted her role as mayor of Maidan Shar, Ghafari was aware that she had become a target. As a young woman in a position of power in a deeply conservative society, her mere existence in office was seen as a threat by many, including the Taliban, who controlled large parts of the country and actively sought to undermine any woman challenging traditional gender roles. The constant threat of violence was a daily reality for Ghafari, but rather than stepping down or compromising her beliefs, she chose to stay, knowing that this decision would come with tremendous personal cost. One of the greatest sacrifices Ghafari faced was the loss of her personal safety. She became a target not only for the Taliban but also for corrupt officials and local power brokers who opposed her reforms. Death threats became a regular part of her life, and her office was attacked multiple times. Assassination attempts on her life only further fueled her determination to continue her work, but these dangers took an immense emotional toll. Living under the constant threat of death required a level of psychological resilience that is hard to imagine. Ghafari had to cope with the reality that at any moment, her life could be taken from her simply because she dared to challenge the status quo. The weight of this knowledge and the stress that came with it became a burden she carried every day. The dangers extended beyond just physical threats to her life. They impacted her family as well. Ghafari knew that by stepping into the public eye and becoming a vocal advocate for women's rights, she was not only putting her savers but also her loved ones. This became heartbreakingly clear when her father was brutally assassinated in November 2020. His murder was a direct consequence of her activism and public role, as the Taliban sought to silence her by targeting her family. The death of her father was an unspeakable loss, and the guilt she felt over his death was a heavy burden to bear. Ghafari's personal grief was compounded by the knowledge that her fight for justice had made her family a target. This profound sacrifice, losing her father, as a result of her resistance, left a deep scar that shaped her understanding of the costs associated with standing up for what she believed in. In Don't Be Kind, Zarifa Ghafari offers an in-depth portrayal of the challenges she faced as a woman navigating a male-dominated society, particularly in Afghanistan, a country where traditional gender roles are deeply entrenched, and the societal power structures are overwhelmingly patriarchal. Ghafari's journey was not just about breaking into the male-dominated political arena, but also about resisting the deeply ingrained societal expectations that sought to limit her potential at every turn. Her experience provides a window into the struggles faced by women who try to assert their place in spaces where men have historically held all the power. Ghafari's decision to become involved in politics in Afghanistan, a country where women in leadership positions are an anomaly, placed her in immediate conflict with a society that is uncomfortable with women in positions of authority. From the outset, she was treated with suspicion and often outright hostility by the men around her. This was not just about gender bias, it was about the broader societal belief that women did not belong in the political sphere. Afghanistan's long history of patriarchal dominance meant that women were expected to remain in the private sphere, tending to family and household duties, while men occupied positions of power and influence. By stepping into the public eye and assuming a leadership role, Ghafari was challenging centuries of social norms. One of the most pervasive challenges Ghafari encountered in navigating this male-dominated world was the lack of respect and recognition for her authority. Many of the men she worked with simply did not take her seriously because of her gender. She was often disregarded in meetings, her opinions dismissed, and her leadership questioned. Ghafari recounts how, despite being in a position of official power, she was frequently undermined by male colleagues and subordinates who refused to acknowledge her as an equal, let alone as a superior. Her ability to command respect was not granted automatically. As it would have been for a man in her position, she had to earn it through constant battles and by proving herself time and again. This ongoing struggle to gain the recognition and respect that came automatically to her male counterparts was a draining and exhausting experience, but one that Ghafari persevered through because she understood that breaking down these barriers was necessary for both herself and the women who would follow in her footsteps. Another significant challenge she faced was the patronizing attitude that men in power often adopted towards her. In many situations, men would not directly oppose her, but would instead treat her as though she were out of her depth, incapable of handling the responsibilities of her position. They would offer condescending advice or speak to her as though she were a novice who needed guidance. This was a way of undermining her without openly challenging her authority, reinforcing the notion that women were inherently less competent in leadership roles. Ghafari had to navigate this insidious form of discrimination, where men would pretend to support her while simultaneously working to diminish her credibility. She had to remain vigilant, constantly asserting her competence and authority, and refusing to be patronized or belittled by those who sought to undercut her. In Don't Be Kind, Zarifa Ghafari's story is one of extraordinary courage, where defying fear becomes the cornerstone of her efforts to drive change. From the very beginning of her career as one of Afghanistan's first female mayors, she was acutely aware of the dangers she faced. In a country where extremist groups like the Taliban held substantial influence and where patriarchal norms were deeply embedded in the fabric of society, her decision to step into a leadership role was not just groundbreaking, it was life-threatening. Yet Ghafari's ability to continue her work, despite the immense fear she faced, underscores her unwavering belief in the power of defiance as a means to bring about lasting change. Fear was a constant presence in Ghafari's life, but rather than allowing it to paralyze her, she used it as fuel to drive her mission forward. She understood that fear, in many ways, is the primary tool of oppressive systems. Whether it comes in the form of death threats, social ostracism, or violent retribution, fear is meant to silence those who challenge the status quo. For Ghafari, defying fear meant refusing to be silenced. It meant standing firm in her convictions, even when it felt like the entire world was against her. She recognized that if she allowed fear to dictate her actions, she would be playing into the hands of those who wanted to keep women out of positions of power and who sought to maintain the oppressive structures that had kept Afghanistan's women marginalized for so long. One of the most powerful aspects of Ghafari's defiance to fear was her willingness to continue her work despite constant threats to her life. As a woman in a highly visible leadership position, she was an easy target for extremists who opposed the idea of women in positions of authority. The Taliban in particular saw her as an affront to their ideology, which strictly relegates women to subordinate roles. From the moment she assumed her office as mayor, Ghafari was met with death threats, and on multiple occasions her life was in imminent danger. Yet, rather than retreating into a safer, less visible role, she chose to confront this danger head-on. Defying fear meant showing up to work every day knowing that she could be attacked at any moment. It meant continuing to push for the reforms she believed in, even as the risks to her life grew greater. Her refusal to let fear dictate her decisions was not only a matter of personal courage, it was also a strategic choice. Ghafari understood that if she, as one of the few women in a leadership role, backed down, it would send a message to other women that their place was not in politics or public service, and that the fight for gender equality was unwinnable. By continuing her work despite the threats, Ghafari was sending a clear message to Afghan women that change is possible, but it requires the courage to face down fear. In many ways, she became a symbol of defiance, not just against the Taliban, but against the deeply rooted misogyny that permeated Afghan society. Her courage showed women across the country that fear does not have to be a barrier to achieving their goals.